just going to fix it.
So you're on tour. I think I'm interested in hearing about where you're coming from, not the States, obviously, and any encounters that were interesting in this moment of dislocation or away from a familiar space that you were and you're not in a familiar space anymore. And where are you going? Are you going back, and is it going to be the same, or is it going to be different?
Since I have probably toured much less than everyone else here, I mean, we were comparing the thicknesses of our passports, and Chris's is like a phone book. Gish as well. For me, this has been really fantastic because in the United States, I have a community of writers, and they are spread out all throughout the United States. But I don't have a lot of friends that are writers in other countries. And we were in Istanbul before this, and got to know a lot of Turkish writers and talk to them and find out young Turkish writers, what do they think? And we talked big issues too, a lot of politics, things like this, and and it was really interesting. And then getting to be here, and last night I got to meet many fantastic Armenian writers and talk to them and find out, what they're writing about, what they're thinking about, what's important to them. That's also really opened my mind a lot to this part of the world, which I haven't had a lot of experience with, even though I grew up in Asia, in East Asia. So that's been wonderful. When I go back, I hope to have, a whole book full of email addresses and Facebook all of you, and continue to have these great conversations.
I brought many things. Let me just say, I'm a person, I'm interested in identity and in culture, so it's a very natural place for me to be. I found a lot of just personal inspiration in a lot of the people that I've met, both here in Armenia and also in Turkey. I think that some of the things that have been the most special to me have been the least scenic. We saw news organizations in both Istanbul and here. And I have to say that when I saw the journalists at Agos in Istanbul, who are writing against the government and really putting their personal lives at stake, I think to see the plaque in the ground where Hrant Dink had been assassinated, and to imagine these young people walking right over that plaque every day to their office, honestly, I felt very humbled and very inspired. I felt very inspired too here in Armenia by the sheer, the invention, the spirit, and the vision of the people at CivilNet TV station. I could see there that they have a very different challenge here. Again, they are in opposition to the government, but nonetheless they're hanging in there. Also, they had invented a whole new kind of news organization, such as, I have to say, I don't think exists anywhere else in the world. And I mean, I know that right now they're mostly focused on getting funding. I think they're mostly focused on making it through this week, and from this week to next week, and from next week to next month. But I do think that I said to the head as I left, I said, I hope that once you feel that you are really stable, that you will try to find some way of cloning yourselves, because many, many, many other countries need what you have invented here in Armenia, and I hope that you will find a way to get it out. And I will say also, as an American, having seen this, that certainly if there was any way that I could help, I would certainly do that in a heartbeat. These are only a few of the things. I have to say also, intellectually, I met some very interesting people, including this poet in the second row. We had a long conversation about individualism and collectivism, something that I'm very interested in. She said that here in Armenia, there is a poet who's also been thinking about these sorts of issues, who's written an essay, and she said that perhaps she would translate that for me, and I'm hoping that I will be able to quote from that in my new book. And I will say, just in a general kind of way too, that I feel that I learned a tremendous amount by just seeing what things like having a special alphabet can do for the identity of a place. You know, the way that, you know, a little community like Armenia, surrounded by big, powerful civilizations, the way that you can hold your own, aided by things like your language and your alphabet, has just been very, very, very inspiring. So I thank you all.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a good question, of course, because I think that most people are transformed in some way by travel, by going to the new spaces, by being in the unfamiliar context, or as Henry James once put it, by being out of context. It's a powerful experience. Writers, of course, are such appropriating and exploiting people that they want to gobble up experience for their work and their imaginations, among other things, not the only thing. But so that really happens. For me, of course, it probably doesn't need underlining that going to Turkey to read as an Armenian American writer with 5 other Turkish writers in 2 different settings, one at Boğaziçi University and another at a very fashionable art gallery in downtown Istanbul, in Beyoğlu section of downtown Istanbul, were large experiences. And they were, and I believe, and I'm not saying this in any, you know, personal sense of importance, but just that I don't believe any other American Armenian writers have ever read in Turkey. I know scholars have gone there for conferences, different papers, but the literary thing's a little different. The gestalt of writers is different. The dynamic and the movement of what writers do when they get together has a different energy. So that energy was very exciting to be in. And I was, you know, there were no issues. I was greeted with great respect, warmth, you know, people were open to all conversations. I mean, probably there were some people in the audience for whom the word Armenian genocide is disturbing, but, you know, not much came out of that. Most of the people there were really progressive, working for democracy in their own culture, and Gish was noting the work that Agos and her Think Foundation are doing. And it's important for us to know because I'm speaking here now, if you permit me, with the collective sense of Armenianness, more or less, we have had a very, very traumatic time dealing with the idea of Turkey in the last century, you know, since the genocide. And, you know, it's important that as we travel, we see that Turkey is made up of many layers, of many sectors, and it's a very diverse, complex society. And this allows us, you know, I think, to establish more humane and intimate and personal connections with the vastness of that place. It's true, the Turkish state is another animal. I didn't deal with the Turkish state on my trip, at least not directly. But I will say, the Turkish professionals in the cultural or public affairs part of the U.S. Embassy were fantastic. They were totally on board with the whole reality of the past. You know, no problem. So this was all very positive. There's more to say about coming to Armenia, which is always energizing and beautiful for me. And to be with my comrades and colleagues, to be with them in Armenia is really special for me, you know, because I get to share some things that I think are rich and deep with them. And it's great to see the community we've had in conversation about being in Armenia.
Yeah, I would echo exactly the last point that Peter made, that, you know, the first revelation to me, and it began to increase as we went along, was how wonderful it is to be with writers you respect, day to day. That's not a typical experience for me. I spent a good part of my life away from writers, working in a federal bureaucracy. But for Chris and Mary and Gish and Peter, just wonderful sojourners of the heart. It's really been something that's special. We were, another thing I think, Chris may be the one person that's aware of this, but, because I sent him an op-ed piece just before we left called "Why I Don't Write About the Middle East Anymore." I just had despaired for a while. I would say 6, 7, 8 years, even before the Syrian civil war. We have relatives that are hiding in their basements in Damascus right now. They come out every few days for a little bread and milk, and they run back in. And we can't get them. We can't help them. We're trying, but we've not succeeded. The extraordinary complexity and heartbreak and anger and confusion, really, of the Syrian situation, and now ISIS. What's to the right of an abyss? Another abyss? The feeling is so strange that you despair. And I just finished a book after working on it for 12 years, and in fact, I think the book itself was a way of escaping the 21st century in the Middle East in particular, and writing about this Spanish priest who founded California. I was so exhausted when it was over. I didn't think, at least up until about a month ago, or certainly about a week ago, that I'd write again. I really think, not to be overly dramatic, but I thought maybe it's over. Maybe it should be over. I mean, what's there to say after a certain point when you're in this dark cavern? But this trip has begun to wake me up a bit in ways that I'm not quite sure about, but I do feel that it's been a bit of a grace. We met a man in Istanbul named Murat Belga. Is that a name that rings a bell to someone? Okay. Well, he's a very courageous Turk. I think he's Muslim. I didn't really ask him his religion, but I assumed it. He spoke out against the Armenian genocide quite some time ago, I think 7 years ago, publicly, and there were an outcry, from officialdom, but then there was 100,000 people that protested in support of him. He took us on a personal tour of old Istanbul, and he pointed out little things, little signs, little etchings in certain buildings that had Greek, in them, or Greek touches, or Armenian touches, that either had been abandoned or were still there, still working. And of course, we went to, is it Athos or Argos, the Armenian newspaper. As was said here, extremely courageous people working against all odds to tell the truth. You see people with such courage, and it gives you courage. Same thing here in Armenia. It was very inspiring to go to this little, I think it's a bookstore last night here, and we had a little reception, and we met a couple of Armenian writers, and one of the writers is going to get published in Turkey, in Istanbul. He's one of those rare contemporary Armenian writers that has crossed the divide, and his book is going to come out on a Turkish press. For me, seeing these tiny bridges beginning to be built, it just leads me to believe not only that, human history does not tend towards silence, it tends towards speech. And speech, even if it's pressured to be false for a long time, sooner or later tends to the truth. And to realize that, I don't know what that says to you, but to me it says that I can't stop writing. So thank you.
Hi. Now I have a question about identity, because in this university we've been discussing that all the time. And first of all, I want to ask you, don't you think it's a made-up concept? And then we Armenians think of ourselves as very unique and special, and like every other nation. But it seems to me that anytime any Armenians gather together, they just cannot stop talking about Turks, Turkey, and everything. Don't you think that really trembles the whole thing about identity? Like, why does our identity have to depend on another nationality or another nation or another country? Why can't we I'm not saying get over the past or get over the history or anything, but we have to get over that identical thing. I don't know the term. I think you should know. What is that? How should we get over it? What is it?
Well, first, I think that, or do we want to go in order?
Could you?
Well, what's it? I'm sorry. What are you directed to kids?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. Here I am, so identity Armenian theory.
I also I have thought a lot about identity, but I know that my fellow writers all have as well. I am a person, as I suggested when I talked about the language here and the alphabet, I'm very aware of the need to, for whatever reason, humans have a need, to look within and to feel that there's something within which is special. I have to say that this business of only knowing who you are by rejecting an other is kind of a poor man's way to identity, right? Just the way that we can bring children up, we can get them to do the right thing by teaching them, or we can get them to do the right thing by using a stick. The stick is what you do when you really don't have time to teach them. You don't have the wherewithal to teach them, but you'd rather not use the stick, right? You would rather teach them. And I think similarly, I think that we should all find our identity in our hearts by looking in, and also in what we do, I noticed that you had that statue downstairs right at the entrance of a man who was very kind. And, to me, I feel like it's all right to just be a kind person, a thoughtful person. This is enough. You don't have to be not the Turks. The Turks really are jerks, I have to say. It's been my own observation. But to allow them to define you is a mistake. And I think that it's important to look at the past. I mean, you must know your past. And I don't just mean back to 1915. It's really clear to me from that history museum that yours past 12,000 BC, 5,000 BC. It's important to know all that. But I think you use all that to face the future. And it is true that on our very first meeting with the cultural attaché from the American Embassy, I said, why is it that Turkey, Armenia have this huge closed border? I do think you have to ask yourselves what it is about this part of the world that people don't seem to be able to get over this. Because I tell you, in Cambodia, things were pretty bad. And today, it's not happy. I mean, believe me, if they look at each other, they remember that someone killed their family. They remember, but they're able to function. There's no big closed, it's not like people were used to live next door to each other. I have seen, again, from other parts of the world, I have taught classes in China where there are people from the Cultural Revolution. They were Red Guards. The people whose families were destroyed are sitting in the next seat. Again, there's no love lost between these people, but can they talk to each other and can they trade? Yes. The Chinese and the Japanese hate each other with a vengeance. But the flights go between Tokyo and Beijing. It's not like, here, when we had to come here via Vienna, I thought, oh my God, like what is going on in this part of the world? And you know, and you look at places like Rwanda. Rwanda also, terrible, terrible things. People have gone on. Now, I have to say that there's another part of the world where people don't seem to be moving on, and that is the Balkans, where I was not too long ago also. But I do think you have to ask yourself if there isn't something about the way that culture is constructed here and the way that identity is constructed here where moving on is a particularly difficult question. And I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that from looking at other parts of the world, that other parts of the world seem to be more able to move on than this part of the world. I don't know why.
Can I follow up? Yeah, just quickly to say, it's a complicated predicament, the predicament you're describing, and I agree with Gish that no individual or no culture wants to define their identity in opposition to another. That's a kind of negative. At the same time, every post-traumatic legacy has a different context, and I would note that there may be something singular about the cruelty of the Turkish state toward Armenians in the last 100 years. It's not untrue. Now let me just finish in saying this. I'm sorry. Now the cruelty of the Turkish state, in the sense that what Armenians can't deal with is that there's been no acknowledgement, let alone even an apology and a kind of concession, a concern for the humanity of a culture group that was close to being extinguished. That's a difficult one to live with, and I think a lot of us really hate having to live with it. We'd like to be free of that whole thing. Now, one can get free of it with a kind of inner transcendence, but if one's going to deal with politics and history, one finds it hard to escape the Turkish state. However, one can also take some solace and some affirmation in the progressive Turkish world that's out there as well and connect with it. So I think that that's a positive. But I think Turkey, there's a huge asymmetry of power here. Turkey's a major and large nation with a lot of power, and Armenia is barely, coming into existence as a country and with a lot of obstacles. And the asymmetry in power is really problematic for Armenians, and we understand that. Having said that as well, I want to just note two things quickly. Cultural identity should be immersed in culture. So Toros Roslin and Krikor of Narek and Parajanov and Saroyan, Arshil Gorky, Charents, Tekeyan, Siamanto, they should be the biggest part of any cultural identity. That's what culture is. Culture is the creation of imagination and its legacy that keeps cultures together. Texts, buildings, churches, art. Aivazovsky. You don't need me to keep going with this, but I want you to embrace the depth and the richness of Armenian culture. It's an extraordinary legacy of millennia, and even in the shorter context, a couple hundred years, the canon is pretty rich. So immerse yourselves in that, that's really key. And the other thing I think that's a really positive legacy for cultures that come out of human rights atrocities is to really get involved with human rights as a universal issue, not just as your own culture's issue, but Rwanda, Cambodia, Bosnia, South Sudan, Somalia, all these parts of the globe that continue to bear the imprint of these kinds of cruelties. Armenians can play a really important role of moral leadership there, and that's a good way to get out of the self.
I think we have another question here.
Hello? Okay, so I just had a question to the panel. How do you keep the practice of writing going? I.e., you get inspired, you have a great idea. How do you get yourself to write every day, especially if it's a novel, but even a poem? How do you keep inspired and keep thinking, hey, this is actually good?
Mary, do you want to take that on?
they have a lot more practice at this than me. Many more years of keeping going. But I will say what's helped me is to define my priorities, so that I divide my time as I divide my life priorities. And so I make sure that when I wake up in the morning, first coffee, nothing before coffee. But that's kind of my life motto. I have a life motto I've adopted, which is have a cup of coffee and try. And that's what I do every morning. I just make a cup of coffee and I try. And I hit those walls where I feel like everything I'm writing is total garbage, or I feel like I don't know how to push it forward, or or I feel the blank page, totally uninspired. Just try. I just continue to put it, as in the end of that poem, I continue to try to drag my body to the surface day after day.
I think the truth of the matter is all of us struggle, and even those of us who've been writing for decades will find periods where it's very hard. And Greg, when I was listening to your remarks, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I've been through that. And I think this, when we were at Gerard this morning, the priest blessed us all, and told us to go on. I mean, I started to cry. So, obviously there is a part of you that feels like, this is very hard, and that, despair is right over there. In the beginning, I tried to have faith in my own talent or abilities and to feel that they were given to me to use. And that got me through many years. But I find that now that I'm older, that the first question I have to ask myself when I sit down is why? Because there's so many ways of contributing to the world. I need to ask myself, why this way? Why this morning? Why? And the truth of the matter is now I don't put my hands on that keyboard unless I can answer that. The answer has changed over the years, but very typically there is a person, and I know I must do it for that person. Now that's a very interdependent view, this idea that you are in service to a person, but the truth of the matter is that for me, it works, and it works, it has enabled me to succeed in a very individualistic field. But for me, I must know who I am serving and what it is going to do for them, and then the morning goes fine.
I might just add, there's a wonderful American poet named Mark Strand who said the most important thing for a young poet to do is to maintain the illusion that you're a writer. And by doing that, getting up, as Mary said, each day and giving it a try, eventually it becomes a part of your metabolism. I was thinking of another American poet in this respect, a poet named William Stafford, who famously wrote poems every single day of his life. And he liked to say that anyone could write poems every day as long as their standards were as low as his. And after he died, his son Kim wrote a very beautiful memoir about him. And a woman came up to him at an event and said, your father liked to talk about lowering their standards. He said, but actually, she said that he's pointing back to that old medieval tournament where the two sides, when there was to be a ceasefire, would lower their standards. And so for Stafford, what that meant was get the ego out of the way, give it a shot. It may not be any good. A third quote, Richard Bausch, another wonderful American fiction writer, said, the only thing that matters at the end of the day is you ask yourself, did I write? And if you can answer yes, then it's a good day. Doesn't matter how it turns out. I keep these kinds of quotes in my head when I'm looking at the blank page thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? Then I remember.
I'll just add one thing. Those are great quotes, and I actually knew William Stafford, so it's wonderful to hear that. Be reminded of his wisdoms again. I think you should also trust silence. Here I'm talking about silence doesn't last forever. It doesn't. But it does. There's nothing wrong with not knowing what to say for a while, perhaps. maybe it's a day, maybe it's a month, maybe it's a year. I think, you know, and so in a way I'm saying this is a different way to write than what Bill was suggesting. Bill Stafford did it every day. I mean, he tilled the soil till something came up. But I think that maybe we're doing some work when we're silent too. You know, walk in the path of your subject. And maybe something will come from that. You know, I traveled all over the place to Spain and Mexico and went up and down the California coast, walking in Junipero Serra's footsteps before I ever wrote anything. And it was just wonderful to just try and see the world as he saw it. And I'll just give you one example on how it sort of spun itself into finally writing. Oftentimes I would drive the California coast at different hours of the day. And if you drive the coast, particularly in this middle coast, the middle coast is a beautiful area. It's not heavily built up as Los Angeles and San Francisco are. I recommend the middle coast to you. But if you look out on the water, as I'm sure Sarah did many times, because he went up and down eight times on muleback or walked. And so he had plenty of time to look out on the water. If you look at the water in the morning, it's a very either gray sheet or silver sheet, but it's not shaped. It's calm and quiet and, you know, spread out. It's not. If you look at the sun on the water at noon or beginning of afternoon, it's starting to shape. As the sun begins to wane, the illumination on the water begins to take a form, and it's often a sort of an oval of light. And then if you look at it at the very end of the day, towards sundown, it's breaking into bars. The light is kind of becoming like rungs of a ladder. And one day when I was doing research, I saw that Sarah loved Saint Bonaventure, who is a theologian of the Middle Ages, and he saw the cross as a ladder to God. He talks about it, it's his metaphor. So I started looking at those rungs carefully, you know, before I wrote anything, and it suddenly hit me that Sarah was looking at Bonaventure on the Pacific Ocean. Now maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, maybe it's my mind playing tricks with me. But, you know, that's when you really come alive, and the centuries just melt away. So we saw Mount Ararat today in a pink light at 7 o'clock in the morning. We woke up in Istanbul and saw these beautiful estuaries of water. And maybe by just concentrating, by paying attention to things that will outlast us, nature and the beauty of the creation, you know, we come back to finding out who we are.
Yeah, just really briefly to finish off on these terrific perspectives, I'll probably circle back to Stafford's notion, which is about keeping the language engine purring in you, even if every day you're not on. It's something important for a writer to keep language hitting the page and to keep the nervous system in shape, you know. As Louis Pasteur, you know, said, chance favors the prepared mind. So if we're writing, you know, in a kind of daily way, even if it's not perfect, we're enhancing the chances, you know, for big things to hit us and to be able to do something with them. So I just encourage all of you, if you're inclined to write, you know, I like the Mark Strand, that's a great quote, Chris. Keep the illusion of being a writer as your fundamental bottom line of life, and write every day and see how it happens and keeps happening.
I think we're probably coming to the end of our time, and I want to say just a word about the International Writing Program before we close. But I was also thinking, as you said that about Stafford, the first time I met him, he had just been on a reading tour in Texas. And at the end of the tour, the editor of the Texas Journal, or the Texas Review, said to him, "Do you have any poems about Texas?" And Stafford said no, but then he got this twinkle in his eye and he said, but by golly, if I didn't get one the next day. So I kind of feel that way about Armenia.
Right. Yeah, right.
And I just wanted to say, so we're here, if you're interested in some of the things we've been talking about today, if you go to the website of iwp.uiowa.edu, you'll see we have a whole range of programs here, including distance learning programs. We're in the middle of a massive online open course in the art of writing fiction. We concluded one this summer on the art of writing poetry. And all these consist of videos done by a lot of writers from around the world talking about different aspects of the craft of writing. Even if the poetry course is over, the fiction course is almost over, but the videos are still alive. You can go watch them anytime you like. And among the other things that you'll have seen here, I can just point on this, the same gate. We had an exchange of poets from Afghanistan, America, Iran, Syria, Pakistan, and Turkey. We met in Konya, where Rumi lived a good part of his life and died, and we brought them together to talk and to write and to have a conversation about the example and the influence of Rumi. And I just wanted to point out that there's also a film here, which is made by an Armenian, Nigal Bajran, who also did a film for us some years ago. He lives in Beirut, and we had a symposium on the Greek island of Paros, and he was to come and make a film there, but the day he was to leave, there was another small civil war in Lebanon, Hezbollah taking over the airport. Nigal could not join us. We happened to be on Cyprus at the time. We found a cinematographer who working on Nigal's instructions, made a very beautiful series. He got a lot of footage from Paros. He gave it to Nigal. Nigal turned it into a film called Home/Lands. If anybody has a complicated understanding of Home/Lands, it would be Nigal. Born in Aleppo, raised in Boston and LA, living now in Beirut, traveling to Istanbul to make films about Armenia. He's been here many times, and he made this very beautiful film. All these things are available on this website, and so you might find it somewhat interesting. I want to just say again my thanks to the American University for making this space available to us and for hosting us in such fine styles, to the U.S. Embassy for bringing us here, and to all of you for sticking with us this afternoon. Thank you so much.